Some stories don't begin with ghosts. They begin with hatred. People often say that revenge never truly ends. It simply changes hands, passing from one person to another until there's nothing left but suffering. Whether you believe in curses, dark folklore, or simple coincidence, there are moments in life that feel impossible to explain. This is one of those stories. It began with two families who once shared everything. They celebrated holidays together. Their children grew up side by side. One woman even became the godmother of the other's youngest son. No one imagined that a single tragedy would turn neighbors into lifelong enemies. 15 years later, Olga was still fighting a war that should have ended long ago. She was 42 years old, a homemaker living in a quiet rural village where everyone knew everyone else's business. On the morning that changed everything, she couldn't shake a strange feeling of anxiety. Nothing seemed to go right. She dropped dishes, forgot simple things. Even making breakfast became frustrating. Her daughter, Natalie, was finally coming home after months away, bringing her fiancé to meet the family for the very first time. Most parents would have been excited. Olga was. But beneath that excitement was a feeling she couldn't explain. As if something terrible was waiting just beyond the horizon. Trying to calm herself, she decided to bake fresh pies for the visit. Halfway through preparing the dough, she realized she'd forgotten to buy sugar. With a sigh, she grabbed her coat and headed toward the village store. Before stepping through the front gate, she instinctively looked toward the neighboring house. She wasn't checking the weather. She was making sure her neighbor wasn't outside. Luba, the woman she hated more than anyone else in the world. It hadn't always been that way. Years earlier, they had been inseparable. Best friends, neighbors, family in every way that mattered. Then came the night that destroyed everything. During Gia's celebration, their husbands got into a drunken argument over something so small that neither family could later remember how it started. Harsh words became shouting. Shouting became fists. Friends pulled them apart, and by morning everyone assumed the fight was over. A week later, Luba's husband was dead. Doctors ruled it a sudden medical complication unrelated to the fight. But grief doesn't always listen to reason. Luba convinced herself that Olga's husband was responsible. From that day forward, forgiveness became impossible. Their friendship turned into something poisonous. At first, the revenge seemed almost childish. Cruel pranks, petty sabotage, small acts meant only to hurt the other person. Then the cruelty escalated. One morning Olga found her dog dead after someone had left poisoned food near her fence. She never proved who did it. She never needed proof. In return, she secretly threw a dead chicken into Luba's well, forcing the family to drain and clean their entire water supply. Soon windows were smashed. Property was damaged. Every insult demanded another. Every act of revenge inspired something worse. But the people who suffered most weren't the two women. It was their children. Natalie and Victor had known each other since childhood. As teenagers, friendship slowly became love. They dreamed about escaping the endless feud that divided their families. But Olga refused to let her daughter see him. Luba gave her son the same ultimatum. The hatred between two mothers became a prison for two innocent hearts. Looking back, it's easy to wonder what might have happened if someone had simply chosen to forgive. Instead, the resentment continued to grow. And before long, the villagers began whispering that something darker had settled over both households. Some believed it was nothing more than grief and anger consuming two broken families. Others claimed the feud had awakened something far more sinister. Whatever the truth was, the real nightmare had only just begun. Years passed. The village watched in disbelief as two women who had once called each other sisters became consumed by a hatred that seemed impossible to satisfy. Every new argument became another story whispered over fences and kitchen tables. People assumed the feud would eventually burn itself out. Instead, it evolved. When petty revenge was no longer enough, Olga crossed a line she once believed she never would. In a neighboring village lived an elderly woman known simply as Mariana. Some called her a gifted healer. Others avoided speaking her name altogether. Rumor claimed people visited her when doctors, priests, and common sense had all failed. Olga didn't tell her husband where she was going, not because she feared his disapproval, but because she worried the old woman might demand forgiveness instead of revenge. She couldn't have been more Mariana listened quietly as Olga poured out years of resentment. When she finished, the old woman remained silent for a long time. Then she disappeared into another room and returned carrying a small cloth pouch filled with black powder. She gave Olga only one instruction: scatter it across Luba's yard after dark. Ask no questions. Olga did exactly as she was told. Whether it was coincidence, suggestion, or something far more disturbing, within weeks, Luba became violently ill. Doctors ran test after test but found no clear explanation. She spent nearly 3 months in the hospital, while her condition remained a mystery. For Olga it felt like proof. For the first time in years her enemy was gone. The village was quiet. She slept peacefully. She smiled again. But peace built on another person's suffering never lasts. When Luba finally returned home she looked older, thinner, almost unrecognizable, and somehow, even more dangerous. It didn't take long before strange objects began appearing around Olga's property. Rotten eggs, bundles of filthy cloth tied with black thread, fish bones left beside the gate. One afternoon, Olga's husband picked up an old sewing needle lying near the front porch. Moments later he collapsed with crushing chest pain. He survived. Barely. After that, neither woman pretended this was an ordinary neighborhood dispute. Every misfortune became another attack. Every illness, every accident, every sleepless night. Each believed the other was responsible. Soon, revenge became the center of their lives. While the rest of the world kept moving forward, they remained trapped in the same endless war. Children grew up. Businesses opened. Relatives died. New babies were born. Years disappeared like smoke. Neither woman noticed. Nothing mattered anymore except striking the next blow. Looking back, it's difficult to say whether either of them truly believed in curses. Perhaps belief wasn't even necessary. Fear has a way of becoming its own kind of poison. Once someone is convinced they're under attack, every coincidence starts to feel intentional. Every setback becomes evidence. Every shadow begins to look like an enemy. The cycle feeds itself until reality and imagination become impossible to separate. By then Olga had changed. The compassionate woman she once was had almost completely disappeared. Hatred had become the only thing giving her purpose. Then one terrible idea entered her mind. If Luba truly loved anything in this world, it was her eldest son Victor. Unlike his younger brother, Victor had grown into a respected young businessman. Calm, hard-working, responsible. Years earlier, he and Olga's daughter Natalie had fallen in love. The two families had destroyed any chance they had of being together. Sometimes Olga caught herself wondering what their lives might have looked like if the feud had never happened. But those thoughts disappeared as quickly as they came. Natalie had moved on. She was building a new life in the city. There was no future left to save. Only revenge. When Olga finally revealed her latest plan to Mariana, the old woman reacted in a way she'd never seen before. For the first time, she looked frightened. Mariana warned her that some rituals could never be undone. There were lines that, once crossed, demanded a terrible price. Targeting an innocent life wasn't revenge. It was something far darker. She asked Olga one simple question. Are you prepared to live with what happens next? Olga didn't hesitate. The answer had already been decided long before she walked through Mariana's door. Whatever remained of her conscience had been buried beneath years of bitterness. And with that single decision, the fate of both families was sealed. Mariana tried one last time to stop her. She warned Olga that some rituals, whether real or imagined, carried consequences no one could predict. Mariana tried one last time to stop her. She warned Olga that some rituals, whether real or imagined, carried consequences no one could predict. When you ask for someone's death, she said quietly, you may not choose who pays the price. Olga barely listened. Years of bitterness had drowned out every voice except her own. She accepted the ritual. And she walked away believing justice was finally within reach. That same afternoon, miles away, Natalie and her fiancé were trying desperately to get home. Every bus was full. Their phones had died hours earlier. With no other option, they decided to hitchhike along the highway. They didn't have to wait long. A sleek black sedan slowed beside them. Natalie smiled with surprise. Behind the wheel was Victor. For a brief moment the years seemed to disappear. Once they had imagined spending the rest of their lives together. If their families had chosen forgiveness instead of hatred, perhaps this ride would have been taking them toward a wedding instead of home. None of them knew it would be their last journey together. Back in the village, Olga couldn't shake the feeling growing inside her. She kept pacing between the front gate and the kitchen window. Natalie still hadn't called. The silence felt unbearable. Every minute stretched longer than the last. She remembered Mariana's warning. For the first time, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. When you ask for someone's death, she said quietly, you may not choose who pays the price. Olga barely listened. Years of bitterness had drowned out every voice except her own. She accepted the ritual. And she walked away believing justice was finally within reach. That same afternoon, miles away, Natalie and her fiancé were trying desperately to get home. Every bus was full. Their phones had died hours earlier. With no other option, they decided to hitchhike along the highway. They didn't have to wait long. A sleek black sedan slowed beside them. Natalie smiled wide surprise. Behind the wheel was Victor. For a brief moment the years seemed to disappear. Once they had imagined spending the rest of their lives together. If their families had chosen forgiveness instead of hatred, perhaps this ride would have been taking them toward a wedding instead of home. None of them knew it would be their last journey together. Back in the village, Olga couldn't shake the feeling growing inside her. She kept pacing between the front gate and the kitchen window. Natalie still hadn't called. The silence felt unbearable. Every minute stretched longer than the last. She remembered Mariana's warning. For the first time, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The crash happened on a stretch of wet highway just outside the village. Investigators would later debate the cause. Some blamed excessive speed. Others believed the rain had left the pavement dangerously slick. No one could say with certainty. The only thing everyone agreed on was that everything changed in an instant. When emergency crews arrived, Victor and Natalie's fiancé were still alive. Natalie wasn't. Witnesses later recalled that, in her final seconds, she turned toward the driver's seat. The last thing she ever saw was Victor desperately trying to save them. When Luba heard her son had been in a serious accident, she ran to the hospital without stopping to breathe. Nothing else mattered. Not the feud. Not revenge. Not the years of hatred. She would have forgiven everything if it meant her son survived. The doctors eventually told her that Victor would recover. So would the young man traveling with him. But there was nothing they could do for Natalie. Olga's world ended the moment she heard the news. There are tragedies that divide a person's life into two parts. Everything before. Everything after. Before, there had been laughter, family dinners, and dreams of watching her daughter build a future. After, there was only silence. And a gravestone. Days later at the funeral, Olga stood frozen beside Natalie's coffin. As mourners quietly offered flowers, another figure approached. It was Luba, the woman she had spent years trying to destroy. Neither of them spoke. They simply looked at one another. For the first time in years, there was no anger in Luba's eyes. Only grief. Olga felt something break inside her. She wanted to confess everything. To admit every hateful thought. Every visit to Mariana. Every choice that had led them here. But the words never came. Some burdens become too heavy for language. Whether the tragedy was caused by fate, coincidence, or the darkness both women had carried for so many years, no one could ever know. But one truth remained impossible to ignore. Hatred had taken everything from them. Both families had lost the future they once dreamed of. And there was no ritual powerful enough to bring it back. Perhaps the greatest curse was never supernatural at all. Perhaps it was allowing revenge to consume every part of a person's life until they no longer recognized themselves. By the time Olga understood that, the lesson had already cost more than she could ever repay. Some doors once opened never truly close. And some choices echo long after the people who made them are gone. Alex had never believed in curses. Ghost stories, haunted houses, evil eyes. Those were things people whispered about around campfires or shared online for entertainment. Yet somehow, after listening to Mrs. Nastia's stories, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about the old man in apartment 7 was wrong. The next morning, as Alex hurried downstairs on his way to work, he saw him for the first time. An elderly man stood silently in the stairwell. His gray coat looked decades old, his posture was unnaturally stiff, and his pale eyes locked onto Alex without a word. The stare lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Alex muttered a polite good morning, and quickly walked past him. The old man never answered. Nothing seemed unusual at first, until everything started going wrong. The city buses that normally arrived every 10 minutes simply never showed up. After standing in the rain for nearly 40 minutes, Alex gave up and tried hailing a ride. Every driver ignored him. Finally, a small white sedan pulled over. The driver smiled nervously. "I'm still learning," she admitted. "You're actually my third passenger ever." Alex almost declined, but he was already late. The ride quickly became one of the most terrifying experiences of his life. The young driver stalled at nearly every intersection, slammed on the brakes for no reason, missed turns repeatedly, and nearly clipped another vehicle while merging onto the highway. By the time Alex reached downtown, his hands were shaking. Unfortunately, his morning wasn't over. As he stepped out of the car, he froze. Standing across the street was his girlfriend, Julia. She had witnessed him climbing out of another woman's car. Before he could explain, Julia's expression changed from surprise to disappointment. "So that's why you stopped answering my texts?" "No, wait, it isn't what you think." She didn't stay to listen. She simply turned and walked away. Alex called after her several times, but she disappeared into the crowd. For the rest of the day, he couldn't focus. Every problem that could happen seemed to happen. His laptop crashed twice. An important client canceled a meeting. His manager blamed him for an error he hadn't made. Even coworkers joked that he looked as though someone had cursed him. Normally he would have laughed. This time, he didn't. That evening, Alex found himself replaying Mrs. Nastia's warning. "Everyone who crosses paths with the old man has bad luck." It sounded ridiculous, yet the timing was impossible to ignore. He had met the mysterious neighbor only hours before everything in his life began unraveling. Coincidence, or something else? For the first time in years, Alex wasn't completely sure. After weeks of bad luck, Alex made a decision. He would stop tempting fate. The stories about the mysterious old man no longer sounded like neighborhood gossip. Every encounter seemed to be followed by another disaster, and Alex found himself changing his routines just to avoid crossing paths with him. He left for work earlier, came home later. Sometimes he even climbed 6 flights of stairs rather than risk sharing the elevator with the elderly neighbor. It rarely helped. Every now and then they would still meet in the hallway, and every single time something seemed to go wrong afterward. Sometimes it was small, a flat tire, a canceled meeting, a broken appliance. Other times it was much worse. One rainy afternoon, a delivery truck skidded through an intersection only inches from where Alex was standing. If he hadn't hesitated to answer a text message, he would have stepped directly into its path. For the first time in his life, he wondered if someone really could carry bad luck wherever they went. A month passed. Instead of enjoying the apartment he'd worked so hard to buy, Alex dreaded coming home. The place no longer felt like a fresh start. Felt like a trap. Eventually he decided to sell it. But something strange happened. The moment real estate agents heard the building's address, most of them politely declined to list it. Some laughed nervously. Others simply said, "That building has a reputation." Nobody explained further. Running out of options, Alex called an old family friend, a local pastor. He didn't necessarily believe the apartment was cursed, but maybe blessing the home would give him some peace of mind. The following Sunday, the pastor walked through the building, offering prayers in each hallway before blessing Alex's apartment. Word spread quickly. Neighbors stepped into the corridor carrying candles, crosses, and family photographs, asking for blessings of their own. Several openly blamed the old man for every strange thing that had ever happened in the building. Some even whispered that he should be cleansed too. Alex watched quietly. For the first time, something about the situation didn't feel right. The fear in people's voices sounded rehearsed, as if they had spent years convincing one another that one lonely man was responsible for every misfortune they experienced. A few evenings later, Alex came home carrying groceries. The old man sat alone on a weathered bench outside the entrance. No one else would sit near him. On impulse, Alex walked over. "You mind if I join you?" The old man looked surprised. Then he smiled. "Not at all." Alex handed him a cold bottle of beer. The old man accepted it with a grateful nod. For hours they talked. His name was Walter. His wife had died nearly a decade earlier. He had no children, no close relatives, just memories. Walter spoke softly about his late wife, the vegetable garden they once kept together, and the old family traditions his grandmother had passed down. According to neighborhood legends, his grandmother had been a witch. Walter laughed when he mentioned it. "She wasn't a witch," he said. "She was just the person everyone visited when doctors couldn't help." Before leaving, Alex finally asked the question everyone else seemed afraid to ask. "Why do you think everyone here hates you?" Walter stared toward the parking lot for several seconds. Then he shrugged. "I honestly don't know. Maybe because I'm different." From that evening on, something changed. Every now and then, Alex would bring 2 beers after work. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they simply sat in silence, watching the sunset disappear behind the apartment buildings. And something else changed too. The streak of terrible luck stopped. Life returned to normal. There were still everyday problems. Late buses, unexpected bills, stressful days at work, but nothing that felt supernatural anymore. Alex slowly realized that the curse had never truly controlled his life. Fear had. Unfortunately, the neighbors noticed their growing friendship. Soon they stopped greeting Alex. Whispers followed him through the hallways. Anonymous complaints were filed against him. Police officers appeared at his door responding to false noise reports. The fire department was called twice because of fabricated emergency calls. The building hadn't changed. Only the target had. That's when Alex understood the truth. The real danger had never been the old man. It had been the power of fear. And how easily people could turn fear into hatred. Several months later, Julia shared unexpected news. She was pregnant. Instead of searching for another apartment, Alex began looking for a small house outside the city. Not because he feared curses anymore, but because he wanted his child to grow up far away from gossip, prejudice, and neighbors who judged people before ever speaking to them. Sometimes the darkest curse isn't something supernatural. Sometimes it's simply what people choose to believe. The end.